Will be momentarily, Mayor Lee. Thank you.
Thank you.
What's the one that we're looking at?
Mr. Chairman, you are live.
Okay, roll call, please.
Representative Kinner.
Here.
Ooh, so enthused. Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Schwartz.
Here.
Representative Simpson. Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Oh, thank you. Chairman is here.
Okay, committee, we'll start off with Senate File 2. We had discussions on this already? Oh, I'm sorry, 6. Contract requirements, that's right. One of my scribbles.
So, Mr. Chairman, where I think we were at when we finished the other day is we had finished public comment and you had raised the question on school districts wanted to postpone it or put it off until we could hear back from school districts. Department of Construction sent us all out a document on that. And we had worked some amendments. And
So did everyone have an opportunity to read those comments that came in?
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, is if you read Mr. Finney's, couldn't remember his name there for a minute. So Mr. Finney works for a school district up in Representative Kinner's part of the world, and he also worked for Department of Construction and went through those bills that we done last year where we straightened up all of the contracting stuff. And then he worked to implement the rules that govern public contracts for capital construction. And I thought his comments were interesting about how he felt like we had just finally got them squared up and the bill kind of adds to some chaos. So that was, I thought that was interesting, just my comments.
Okay, any other discussion on the bill? Question being called. Roll call.
Representative Kinner.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Larson started this meeting, so is he going to be the end chair? He's the one that started this bill yesterday.
Sure.
Okay, then Representative Schwartz. Let's see, which one are we on? 6. Representative Simpson left a no vote. Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
No.
Chairman Nicholas.
No.
Vice Chairman Larson.
No.
4 noes, 3 ayes.
So, as you know, last year, the good vice chair worked a bill and did a tremendous job on it. So I think we ought to just make a note. There's some good concepts in this bill, but there's lots of issues that we have with the bill. But I think your JAC, if we can get the other side to do it, would be happy to take this project on in the interim and kind of work with this. I think there needs to be consideration for those school districts that already have their own pre-qualification guidelines. The school district here has them, and it modifies what they have. Some folks just don't want to do it. There are projects where folks don't want to do it, and so I just think it takes some more work.
Mr. Chairman, if I may as well, as we just got the new stuff into place. I think we will have had a year now to see how that works, and let's see how we can modify to fit that. I think your point is well taken, and I don't argue that we probably need some tweaks, but I think now we've had time with the implementation of the new rules to see what we do need to do.
Senate File 2. Mr. Walters, are you going to walk us through this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity here. This is Senate File 2. And really the purpose of this bill is to improve efficiencies in the process. It comes to you from the Select Committee on School Facilities. of which I have had the opportunity of serving as the chairman or co-chairman the last couple of years. So that's why I'm here presenting to you tonight, Mr. Chairman. So as I said, this bill streamlines the process, increases transparency in assessing K-12 school facilities across Wyoming. It's a result of a collaborative process between the Select Committee, the School Facilities Commission, and the State Construction Department over the course of the 2019 and 2020 interims. And generally speaking, this really relates to statutes 21-15-115, 21-15-117. That's really where we're going to be working today. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just walk you through the bill. Starting on page 2 is really where it starts, and a lot of this bill is just going to be conforming language. So on page 2, the one change is just a conforming change. Again, on page 3, line 2, that's a conforming change. Page 4, excuse me, those changes are just conforming changes. Page 5 in lines 12 through 14, this suggested change is designed to reflect the adequacy standards function as standards rather than guidelines and to clarify the purpose of those standards. And this ensures that the building is capable of delivering the educational program. Functionality of educational spaces is really what we're trying to address in that. Moving on to page 6, the changes there are all just conforming changes. Page 7 is really where we get into the real meat of the bill. And so page 7 and page 8, it creates 3 lists combined into one list in the very end, a consolidated list. This ties the prioritization schedules to the adequacy standards creating cohesion between 21-115 and 21-15-117. So on page 7 and 8 here, this is in this language 21-15-117A4, that is repealed, and they adding the language here ensures that it applies to all 3 schedules on the list. Then we move on to page 8, and the very bottom of the page is the first list, which has to deal with condition. Already an existing statute, just a kind of reorganization here. Bottom of page 9, line 15, this is the capacity study. Again, something we already do, just a reorganization. Then we move on to page 10. Page 10, line 9, and this is the suitability. And this is really the one that's been an issue for quite some time, is what is suitability? Well, over the last couple of interims, we feel like we've came up with an objective way to measure suitability. And so this would be the 3rd list. And then on line 17 of page 10, this is the consolidated list. And so this is how you would take all of the information from capacity, condition, and suitability and create one list. Then moving on to page 11, that change is just conforming. Page 12, both of those changes are just simply conforming changes. Page 13, it's a conforming change. Page 14, on lines 6 through 12, this change, attempt to create efficiency by using similar designs for schools. You might call them cookie cutter schools, or use the same plans for multiple locations. And then it gives statutory backing to the way the commission uses these design guidelines to fulfill that practice. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be identical, but it uses a lot of the same concepts to save some costs. And it does also make sure that these guidelines do not apply to major maintenance. And then I'd point out on line 10 on page 14, after the word repair, there is in the blue copy an "and" was added. And that is the only change from the original version to the blue copy. Is it was a typo, and that "and" was missed. So the Senate didn't make major changes beyond that, just wanted you to know what changes they had made. Then line 15, or page 15, excuse me, line 17 in the repealers, repealing 21-15-115B is probably the biggest cost savings in this bill. And the reason I say that, this is a separate assessment, but very similar to the assessment for capacity and condition that is discussed in 21-15-117. So instead of duplicating the studies, we will just end up doing it once. So that repealer is very important. And then page 15, line 17 in the repeal section, 2115-117, little a4 is now on page 8, lines 2 through 4, and 2115-117, a5 is now on page 8, lines 7 through 11. So like I said, it's really a reorganization of the statutes, cleans them up, and makes the whole process more efficient, more transparent. And that is the bill, Mr. Chairman.
So on page 7, line 8, says the commission shall annually evaluate adequacy. Has that been the practice in the past, or did that, because I don't see annually in the deleted language, but is that the regular process?
Mr. Chairman, that is a regular process. So they do the study every 4 years as required by statute. And then they look at the list annually to see what was completed the previous year in comparison to the needs on the list, you might say. So they're always making sure that they stay up to date with the prioritization. So if a school needed rebuilt because it was falling to the ground, it might be number 1 on the list this year. Because it's been funded and is under construction, it would no longer be number 1 on the list next year. So they have to annually review that and just see where the projects are, see how that list is being undertaken, you might say. And so they review it in that standpoint annually.
Okay, questions? Representative Larson.
Representative Walder, would you remind me back on page 14, that new language there from 7 through 12? If my memory is correct, that was some conversation that we had in the select committee to try and reduce costs to where where the school districts around the state, we didn't have it was a design savings to where we could have one design and take it out to across the state to fit the district to where it was going to, and then be able to value engineer in or out of that. Is that, am I remembering that correctly? Or maybe you can explain it better.
Mr. Chairman, I think Representative Larson, you're spot on. It was to use that same design in multiple locations with just minor modifications for each to make it site specific. And so this language was the best attempt we could come up with to accomplish that task.
You know, it's one of the things that I wish we could change is having every school in every town and every other town all look the same. I mean, that's just a tough deal. And you know, there's got to be dozens and dozens of designs that are out there that are already done and just can be reworked. I don't know if it's just my pet peeve.
Mr. Chairman, I would expect nothing less from you after selecting brick colors with you, because I've gone around the state and have been amazed at the variety of schools that we have in thought that we could probably have them more the same, but it's a good thing I didn't pick the colors and you did.
Actually, I agree with Chairman Nicholas. I don't know how we do it, but for communities to be able to have some level of ability to, it's not personal, community, I don't know what the word is, but to give more personal characteristics to their own school has value. I also agree that we don't want to go too far. So I don't know what the compromise is, but I want the compromise.
So are you, and I hear what you're, Mr. Chairman, I hear what Representative Schwartz is saying, but I'm not sure. Are you saying you want to do something different with this language? What are you saying? And I might, if I may, Mr. Chairman, kind of go back and Chairman Walters can correct me. But the discussion is how do we get greater value from our design process and still maintain local identity. And that kind of was the value engineering component of it. But so I'm not sure that.
So what was the discussion on that issue? It must have come up. Did that issue come up?
Mr. Chairman, it did come up, and this was our best attempt at creating that cookie cutter uniform design and still allowing for some local control in the process. It was a discussion that took place at several different meetings for a period of time at each meeting. I forget exactly how long, but I think the discussion the committee's having currently is exactly the discussion our select committee had, is how do we allow that local control component along with a standardized design process. And it comes back to a comment you made earlier, Mr. Chairman, where if a district is used to using a certain brand of HVAC systems because they're all in their district, and then the state decides we're going to use a different one, well, it affects that district. And so that's how we were trying to still allow things like that to take place. And then also trying to take into account that not every lot is an open vacant lot of an equal size. And so some might be an L shape or a rectangle or a triangle. And so how do you fit that standard design onto it? And so without causing more expense by saying we're going to use the same design, but now we have to fit a square peg into a round hole. And so that's what this language attempted to address, was to make sure we could get as much efficiency out of the process as possible without tiring our hands into a more expensive process.
And so how do you handle, I think this county sometimes uses their own architects. They construct it on their own, isn't that right?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is it's a collaboration between the district and the School Facilities Commission as they work on it. And the commission somewhat starts the process and says, here's some designs to get you rolling. But I don't know that they use a firm hand and say, these are the ones you will use. And so again, we're trying to get the best value we can with leaving the local control.
Yeah, in fact, I've been involved with the construction department because this community wanted to do different and more creative design work. And the commission was balking at that, so I had to intercede in it. So I just want to make sure that these rules allow the flexibility. I mean, if a school wants to retain their own architect with their reserve funds or something and come up with something that is unique and is, I want to make sure that flexibility is there within what we want really is value engineering and reasonable similar costs, not necessarily a cookie cutter all the time.
Mr. Chairman, I think with this language that flexibility still remains.
And I think, Mr. Chairman, but we also have to exercise caution because there's some districts then that have the extra resources and put in some of the nice things that you imply, and then we have to maintain it at extra cost. And I think that we have to exercise caution that we don't have these enhancements to a level that end up costing the state more money.
Well, but those type of enhancements are the district foots the bill, typically.
For construction.
Yeah. Further questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman or Chairman, whoever's in charge. Representative Walters, was there any discussion to some level, using modular components that could be incorporated into a design that had that local identity? And I just got the answer.
Mr. Chairman, to answer that question, yes, there was. And the interesting thing about using modular or building block type components is you have to start out with a core that to suit a larger size. So your cafeterias, your gymnasiums, things like that have to be large enough, early enough in the process to address, say, a doubling of the school through a modular, and I shouldn't say modular, but an add-on type of building block system. There's a school in the southwest side of the state that's really working on doing something like that, where it has multiple wings that could be built on that are shown in early drawings. But those wings are only needed if the school gets another 250 or 500 students, and then the next one comes into play. And all of that works, but the downside is that that core function has to be built large enough to start with, which adds a significant cost early in the process, maybe 10 or 15 years in advance of when those wings would be needed, that next building block. And so that becomes somewhat of a stumbling block in doing that kind of a design. And so it sounds great until you get into it a little deeper. And so it is considered, it's being used in a few locations for some high schools, but it's certainly not off the table, but it's not, I won't say it's not widely used. It's a concept that's there, that's available.
So committee, what if we added on to that sentence on page 12 or line 12? Something to the effect that says, and allow reasonable input and participation for conforming and aesthetic designs in the community. Page 14, line 12. Just excluding major maintenance buildings, repair and replacement projects are subject to value engineering and are reasonably uniform across the state, but allow reasonable input and participation for conforming and aesthetic design in the community. But allow, but also allow, it's probably better, reasonable input and participation for conforming and aesthetic design in the community. Does that make sense?
What does reasonable mean?
The same thing that reasonable uniform means. What do you think, Tom?
I certainly don't think it hurts anything. I think that's already a part of the process as they work through the district and the school facilities commission work together on projects. But
I
if you
just
think
think
it
it had-
enhances the language, I certainly don't think it hurts.
I think that having it in statute gives them, they can say, hey, wait a minute. And also it gets them in early in the game if they choose to. So,
And
did you get that, Mary Lee? I'll give it back. I'll give it to you after we're done. if needed. So further discussion? Seconded by Representative Schwartz. Representative Stiff. Move the bill. All this, second. Discussion. Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, just, I think I understand the concept here, but are you saying that, I mean, if there were an aesthetic add-on, that might be borne by the local district? Is that kind of the idea here?
Well, we're talking about value engineering and reasonably uniform. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
And I think with that, we need to allow reasonable input and participation for conforming and aesthetic design in the community.
Right.
So
And
it, depends on how you place it on the block, how big the color of the brick, what your neighbors look like. And mean, just
Mr. Chairman,
things
I'm
that-
thinking of, say, there's a town in the northwest corner of the state where there's a grocery store that looks a little bit like a Swiss chateau, because they've got these zoning
Yeah.
regulations to make everything sort of fit in nicely. So everyone thinks that it's a ski lodge instead of a grocery store.
What an interesting sounding community.
And so, and I might need to just touch up that language a little bit so it reads better, but conceptually, I will move that as an amendment.
And
Further discussion.
just, Mr. Chairman, just to make sure, again, Representative Stiff, that this is right in the design of the building, and so they may have some brick enhancement or something that they want, not so much a swimming pool or something like that, right, Mr. Chairman?
Correct.
It doesn't cancel out the first part of the new language.
That's right.
We still deal with conformity.
Yep. But allows a little flexibility and participation. And I think you're right, that happens, particularly for big school districts, because they've got professionals that are full-time, that's what they do. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion carries. Public Public comment on the bill, after we've already amended it a little bit. Is there any public comment? Seeing anyone online? Okay, we will close public comment. Tom?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to throw you a little curveball here for the committee to chew on. And that is, we had House Bill 2 that was to fund a study for the capacity and condition and suitability that's required every 4 years. And as of a year ago, we are now out of compliance because we have not funded that study.
You want to throw it in here?
It's just about doubled in price because we add suitability to this study over versus doing just capacity and condition. So the curveball I would throw you is the possibility of amending out all of the suitability language and just going back to doing a capacity and condition study and then putting funding in for about $3 million to do that study. And the reason I think that study is so important, Mr. Chairman, is because, as I said, it's required every 4 years and we are currently out of compliance. And if districts are looking for reasons to garner more money out of the state, this would be a way that they could take us to court and so take the state to court. So like I said, it's just a curveball if the committee wants to chew on that.
I think it's not a bad idea. We could either amend it out, or we could say that this goes into effect after the study's performed with not require the suitability.
I think both are really valid options.
Which would read better and be easier. Then we wouldn't have to come back and modify the statute.
Quite honestly, I think removing all of suitability would be the best option. It's really because of one line in suitability where it says the appropriateness of the student environment. And that's the most difficult component to objectively identify. The lighting, the ventilation, or air quality, excuse me, and technology readiness are easy to objectively identify, which are all components of suitability. However, those lines, appropriateness of student environment, is just so difficult as all 6 of you or 5 of you could decide have a different view on what's the appropriateness of the student environment. And by removing that suitability language, capacity and condition have been studied for the last 15 years, probably, if not longer. It's a known metric. It's quite easy to address objectively. And so,
So there's a second to take out suitability, which I seconded, by the way, for the discussion. I think it's a conceptual amendment because we'll just have it worked out and we'll have a final look at it tomorrow. Will that work? Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Well,
with your amendment, are you including some funding for this study as
Yep.
well?
and well, there was 3 million or 2.5 million that
I
was.
think 3 million would be the perfect number.
Okay, so we'll put 3 million in for it. Swart?
Thanks. I'm just curious, in the conversations you all had about appropriateness of student environment, did you come close to a definition?
Mr. Chairman, as close as the good representative has as he speaks to me tonight. That's how close we came to a good definition.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, so taking that out, are we kind of going back to the way we've handled it? And so if so, then why do we need the bill?
Mr. Chairman, we are going back to the way we handled it, but even with this bill, we get rid of another study for capacity and condition that was duplicative. And so the bill still cleans up the statute, makes it function a lot better, saves us money in the long run due to the duplication of the capacity and condition studies. This was really, the suitability component was delineated separately as an attempt over 2 interims to try and figure out what is suitability. Quite honestly, we maybe have it figured out, but we certainly don't have it figured out to the extent that capacity and condition are known. And it doubles the cost of the study immediately. And I think there's long-term costs that would come to the state as districts wanted to ask for money for suitability components. And so I think by removing it, it certainly will save the state in the long run.
And you can't do it without adding costs. Because it's just another component.
Absolutely, Mr.
And
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the select committee, I recall when we went over to the university to look at the student lab, is that what we call that thing? and went into the student lab and with people from, and I thought, man, this is a cool old building. And they says, well, but you couldn't teach here. And I says, why? And they says, well, because it's not suitable for the students. And again, the question was why? And that's just about as, you know, that's just kind of how that conversation goes on suitability, and kind of went on through the course of that day. And I think that that's very ambiguous to define what is suitable. I mean, we can get into some lighting and some things that I think most people can agree on, but then you start getting down, and so I think that's really, I really think the chairman's got a
We'll have
great
to create a
suggestion.
suitability committee.
Select
Select
committee on
suitability.
suitability. Task force.
Okay, so all in favor of the conceptual motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, that motion carries. Tom, why don't you look at it and approve it? And we'll kick it out with as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Roll call, as amended.
Representative Kinner,
Aye.
So Tom, I presume that the suitability issue will continue, and if the committee works on the definition more, comes up with better ideas, then we'll see them again.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, we're voting roll call right now, but the language in front of us is not the exact language we're voting on. Is that right?
Well, yeah, well, correct. We're just
Okay.
we're just gonna take out
Okay.
all the suitability.
Okay.
components, And we'll circulate it before we kick it out.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Schwartz. Representative Simpson left an aye vote. Representative Stiff,
Aye.
Representative Walters. Chairman Nicholas.
All right, so we just want
I would
to
be surprised.
crank this as fast as we can because we're running short on time. Okay, the last bill that we have in front of us is Senate File 71.
Move the bill.
We're going to give public comment for about 2 minutes. We know what the good chief executive is going to say. So we appreciate your comments before we kill this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Erica Legursky, Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to visit with you today. It's always a pleasure. First, I'd like to start by thanking you for the hard work on House Joint Resolution 9. It's my understanding that it passed third reading today. For those of you who knew me in my prior life, I referred to that as WyoStar 3. And that was something that, that the governor had wanted for a long time as an initiative. And it will allow local communities to invest in equities, which in turn will help local communities as well as our constituents. That's been a priority of the governor's for a while, and we really appreciate your hard work in helping move that forward. Also wanted to thank you for your hard work on the budget this session. It's been a little difficult, I think, for you guys and also for our office. So we just appreciate the continued conversations that we've had on those and just want to continue those as we go forward. Another initiative, as you can guess with the governor, is Senate File 71, one checking and one savings as part of the governor's initiative to improve and simplify the budgeting process. As we heard today with Joint Conference Committee, it's a little complex. The complexity of the current system exists with numerous accounts, and it makes the state's financial position difficult to understand for our constituents. The governor's been talking about this concept for one checking, one savings for one time, and we feel that Senate File 71 gets us closer to that. So our office looks forward to working with you guys in the future for continued transparency and simplification of the budgeting process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's all.
That's all.
Any questions?
Short and sweet.
Mr. Chairman, I have been a little, so I've heard conversations say, well, at home you have one checkbook and not at our house. And I doubt in anybody's house is probably not at your house. And so I've been a little curious as to why or how this is viewed as difficult.
Mr. Chairman, so I think when you start looking particularly at the spending policies, is where we get a little confused. You know, there is some money, and I know that when we started with the SIPA, it was part of a compromise in 2013 that the governor had worked on with the legislature to get that. As we have that SIPA account and you go through those spending policies, it seems like every year we change those, and there's always some tips or some diversion of that money that goes through there. And I think it's difficult for us to understand. And then when you try and explain it to the public, it just makes it that much more difficult on there.
Thank you.
Other public comment? Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ashley Harpstreet. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming Taxpayers Association. Thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts today. Since 1937, the Wyoming Taxpayers Association has been educating and informing its members and the public around sound fiscal policy, providing state and local policymakers with unbiased analysis of public expenditures and taxation, and promoting efficient and effective government. Everything we do centers around our mission to advocate for sound tax policy for a healthy Wyoming economy. Additionally, we have built on our mission and principles with recent creation of a WTA spending policy, exemption considerations, and cornerstones of taxation. With this in mind, WTA and its board of directors overwhelmingly supports Senate File 71, Strategic Investments and Projects Account Repeal, as we feel it is in line with our criteria, analysis, and mission. WTA also believes it aligns with the efforts supported by the governor in his effort for transparency in government finances and promotes efficient and effective government, which ultimately will save the taxpayer dollars. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll stand for questions.
Questions? So just to comment, I would completely disagree. SIPA saves taxpayers dollars because, I mean, you could even witness it today, and it's a regular occurrence in the legislature, that when there's money in the pot, people will spend it. And then you have a natural inflationary component to every budget. You have increases in salaries. You have all these kind of things, plus regular inflation. So when you spend all the money in the pot has to be bigger the next year. So one of the things that SIPA does is it pulls a little money away from that pot, which are basically one-time dollars. And you don't want to use one-time dollars to fill up your entire budget. If you do, then when you have a shortfall, either you got to have a tax increase or you got to find other revenues to carry on your regular course of business. By taking the SIPA dollars out of the equation, then you make less money available to spend. So it really can be and operates as a savings account. And this situation is a good example. We've used part of this to cover major maintenance. We've used it for different projects, but it's really a kind of a second story piggy bank for us to take care of the ongoing operations of business. And by doing so, we save money. Number two, the government always has one-time projects that need to be funded somehow, some way. And so if we don't set aside a little pool of money, then we can't do new construction. We can't do major maintenance projects we can't afford. We can't build a new Wyoming Life Resource Center in Lander that was dilapidated and frankly was out of compliance with federal guidelines. If we don't have a SIP account, we either have to borrow it or we have to bond it. So otherwise, where else are we going to get the money? Because we'll have to take it from somebody else. So there's lots of components of this that has a real value, I think, and it saves the taxpayers money. There's nothing that is not transparent about it. It's as transparent as can be. And it's there for everybody to see and easy to explain. So it's just and it's also a tool for the legislature to do the things that we need to do and we're obligated to do. So with that, I appreciate the comments and further comments.
Mr. Chairman, in just more of the same, just a little bit, because I guess the three examples, frankly, is when we come to the legislature and then 2 years later, as we started, we knew that we had to redo the state hospital, right? And we knew that we had to redo the Life Resource Center. And then it was, and we'd considered the veterans home at the same time. Didn't have the money, didn't have the money. We had the SIPA funds and the days of the tranche that would come in. And so we started setting money aside and we knew it was there. And it's kind of like that guy that, I can't say his name, but teaches you how to save and not go into debt. And so we're sticking that money in an envelope and putting it on the fridge to pay for these. And then we get the Casper office building, and all of those were done with these one-time dollars, which I agree would have went into the general fund, would have funded the general operations of government, and would have been consumed up in ongoing budget. So my question then, just with that, is how would you have done it differently?
I'll have to bring all this Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I'll have to bring all this feedback back to my members. I just
It's okay.
can't say that. Yeah, you gave me a lot to digest.
Well, the next time we go to a conference, we'll explain it to them.
Sure.
Maybe they'll
I would
change
love to
their
have you as a speaker. There you go.
Well,
I guess we would say, look at the LISRA, and I mean, there's just so many different pots of funding. And so back to the governor's efficiency and trying to make it transparent for people to understand. If we were into two pots of money, where this is for strategic investments and then this funds general government, but there's other pots, so.
well, and we appreciate it. We'll take one pot at a time and try to help you understand. But we thought, and most of us were there when we decided to create SIPA. And, I just recall when we was working on the State Hospital and Life Resource Center and had the design team that was doing that. And we was in the Jonah building, and they said, so are you bonding? Are you, how? And we said, no, we've got the cash. And they just, whoa, $150 million and you're just going to pay cash. And they just, was First State, these guys do psychiatric facilities. And I think as taxpayers, that's prudent.
Sure. Chairman and Representative Larson, we would love to have you at our annual meeting, and maybe the governor could moderate your panel.
We'll speak just after the governor speaks.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yep.
Thank you. And I agree with all that has been said about the SIPA account, but I will confess, when I first read this bill, I got very excited about getting rid of the legislative deficit control account.
Okay. Any other comment? Any other questions? Have we moved this bill yet? No. Move? Okay, public comment. We'll close. Any other public comment on the radio?
There's not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll close public comment. Move the bill. Moved by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Stiff. Further discussion? Roll call.
Representative Kinner.
No.
Okay, that was a no. That was a no, right?
Yes, it was a no.
There was a,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm tired.
Representative Larson.
No.
Representative Schwartz. Nope. Representative Simpson left a no vote. Big surprise. Representative Stiff.
No.
Representative Walters. Chairman Nicholas.
Nope.
You know how that went.
Okay, that concludes our stuff today. Ryan, can you turn us off? Because we'll have some informal discussion.